You're listening to Three Makes Baby, a podcast about fertility, family, and genetics. I'm Jana Rupnow, a fertility counselor and author of Three Makes Baby. Welcome to the show. It's another day, another podcast, and today it's going to be a really interesting subject. You're going to want to listen to this. I know there's going to be big feelings around this. I've met with the amazing person behind Satirical Donor Conception on Instagram. I've just had the most amazing conversations with her about donor conception and about how it impacts the lesbian community as parents and as children. So thank you for joining me. I'm not going to be using her name because that's, per her request, but I just wanted to say thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me
today. Tell me what made you or what prompted you to start the account in the first place? Because I think you were telling me about a year ago is when you started it.
Mm-hmm. So a year ago, I was super stressed out in April studying for my my comprehensive exams. I'm a PhD student, and I think I was on my spin bike one day, and I thought, it would be a wonderful outlet, creating this account. And I think the reason that I chose satire is because I do think that there are a lot of aspects of donor conception that lend themselves very well to satire, because the crux of something being satirical is pointing out these really absurd elements of something, or even of everyday life, and just saying out loud, like, isn't this thing that we accept and we take for granted actually kind of wild if you just look at it a little bit differently? Like this idea that some of us are just walking around with 200 siblings, like, isn't that kind of absurd?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or even the idea that if you have any kind of feeling about it, I mean, you've been brainwashed by society, and that's kind of the message that you get. If you just unpacked your feelings and you just thought about it differently, you'd be happy. Or this idea that you're, legally unable to connect with your own genetic family. I mean, it's absurd, but it is absurd, but it's accepted.
When you think about, I think it's a great point when you think about satire, because what satire usually does is it does elicit a different response. Often it's effective. It's effective because of that.
Yeah. And I think a part of it is, it is a very, it's a different way of trying to get your point across without necessarily being too aggressive.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that would look at it and just immediately be like, I can't handle it, and walk away. And that's okay. They don't have to. But then there's other people that will take it in and go, oh, this is showing me layers. This is making me think differently. And that sounds like that was the intention.
The intention was just for it to be an outlet. And to be quite honest, it's something that's by and for donor conceived people. I mean, the intended audience is not anyone else.
You've created this for donor conceived people, so for them to have a place there where they can be understood.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
We experienced something interesting. She posted something I really appreciated, and I shared it. I reposted it, and we'll get into what that is in a minute. And when I did that, just because I truly just was like, I love this. This is great. And I didn't know I was stepping into something right there, because I got messages back from accounts that were unhappy with the post. You said, in attempting to be all revolutionary, in quotes, all same-sex couples using gamete donors is reinforce the idea that the nuclear family is the only preferable or legitimate family option. And this always involves the exclusion of a parent. And then you're talking about same-sex couples in particular, because of all the references to, quote, queering reproduction, of how revolutionary it is to pretend genetics aren't real at all. So we got and then you say, there's nothing particularly revolutionary about pretending that the nuclear family is best or most legitimate form of family, the most revolutionary thing one can do is just tell the truth. But the truth about many facets of identity and history is nearly impossible in the system of gamete purchasing. Can you maybe explain a little bit more? So I reposted that because to me, I mean, I'm intimately involved in this. I've been doing this for 12 years. I understood it. But then by reposting it and not explaining better, maybe I did more of a disservice. So what of your message here?
So I feel like it's necessary to point out that on that account, sometimes I say things that are 100% not satirical, and that was very serious and how I feel.
Okay.
Um, and the context for that really is not that I'm trying to speak to, the gay community broadly. I don't think that everyone who has ever purchased gametes will go ahead and say, well, it's just a cell, genetics aren't real, all of that. But, what that kind of came from was this idea that this is, if you are in a same-sex relationship, your only option. This is something that you need to do. There's no other way of going about it. And the reality is that if you are a same-sex couple and you use donor gametes and you exclude the other genetic parent, you are in a two-parent household. This is conventional. It's not conventional insofar as, you're gay, but in thinking about my own life, my own family, my girlfriend has children. I would like to have children. She co-parents with gay men. I would love to co-parent with my best friend. He's a gay man. And just looking at my life and thinking, there is another way. I don't love being told that simply because of this characteristic that I can't control, that my only option is to procreate with strangers. To me, that is truly, like the problematic position to take. And even if that's the route that people want to go, I mean, of course, I have a bunch of lesbian friends who have used donor gametes. It's not like we're not friends. It's not like I'm looking at their adorable kids and being like, get away from me, but I think it's unfortunate that people look at this system and go, this is my only option. And I do think that there's a small facet of the community that thinks that this is the most revolutionary thing in the world. And I don't agree. I don't think it is. I don't think it is just because we're gay.
Yeah. And you are donor conceived, and you found out it was a late discovery as well, right?
It was. And I'm cool with saying that now, but it's something that I don't love to be open about, because I feel like even that is kind of used against me in these in conversations about donor conception, right? Because then the fallback for some people is, well, you're only mad because you found out at 22, and if you had grown up knowing, you would be totally fine with it. And it's like, I mean, maybe or maybe not, but that's not my reality.
Yeah, it's true. It is something that people think that late discovery means that's it's oversimplified, that's the reason people are mad, and it's not true. There's so much more to it. So, but back to what you were saying about using, the revolutionary thing, because we did get feedback, and some people were very nice about the way they asked and sort of help me understand how, this isn't, how it's not revolutionary. And revolutionary isn't necessarily excluding people that helped create you, and just having a two-parent family. So that's the nuclear family you were kind of referring to. And that's not as revolutionary as like what you described, especially co-parenting with a friend, and having a bigger family, nuclear family. That's not just two parents and kids, but maybe four parents and the kids.
Yeah. I think the reason even though I obviously support same-sex couples having children, and I think that is, revolutionary in its own way, it's kind of like, you know, all these questions we ask ourselves about something like capitalism and how can we make these ethical choices in this system that's just so fundamentally unethical. I think it's the same thing, you know, when we talk about donor conception. How can you make ethical choices in this system that is so unethical? And in my position, and keep in mind, I'm just one person. I have no power to control the fertility industry or what other people do, but I don't think that we can act ethically in this system. And I think that for myself personally, if I ever wanted to have kids, and if my best friend was open to co-parenting with me, which we were talking about this earlier today, actually, and and I think he is, that would be, to me, the more ethical option for me. You know, and it's, yes, it's complicated because it is unconventional. But, and I know that a lot of same-sex couples will say a known donor or co-parenting is very complicated, as if having 50 siblings isn't complicated, and as if not being able to legally contact your genetic family isn't complicated too.
And it's not just, I think when you say 50 siblings, they just go, okay, well, they're out there. But what you don't understand is that donor conceived people are getting contacted sometimes monthly with a new sibling, and they're having to go through this process of all over again, learning a stranger, trying to figure out if the stranger is aligned with them. Is that going to work out? And then knowing they're related to them, and all the work of assimilating that information they find out about that half relative. And what does that mean to you? How does that reflect on you or not reflect on you? Or it's kind of that, what can you filter out? So all of that is ongoing complexity for the rest of your life. That doesn't end for you.
And even, you know, the idea that I want to have kids. I mean, it's not like donor conception just affects me, it affects my children too. And, you know, being able to give them answers when they eventually, you know, exist about certain things. And there's just information that I don't have that I wish I did.
How can we explain that it's not, that talking about genetics or the role of genetics or how it plays into identity development isn't homophobic?
I think
because that's the messages we got last week, was that this was a homophobic message, and that was hard, really hard for both of us.
Absolutely.
Especially you.
I think that it's useful to keep in mind that very few people actually, in the conversations that I have, and obviously my position is not that, you know, gay people shouldn't be parents. And even though I would love to co-parent with a gay man, I don't think that, you know, lesbians should be forced to parent with men. I don't think that that my position necessarily means, you know, all of these various parents should have custodial rights. I don't necessarily think that that's true. And I don't think knowing, you know, your genetic parent necessarily means that they have that kind of control and responsibility in your life. The flip side of that, though, is that I don't like to perpetuate the fiction that reproduction itself is anything but the meeting of male and female gametes. And I don't think that pointing that out is heteronormative. It's literally true. And, you know, this is kind of when people talk about, well, you know, it's just a cell, it doesn't matter, it'll never matter. There's nothing, you know, there's only homosexuality happening here. I mean, unfortunately, reproduction isn't like that. I wish that I could have a baby with my girlfriend.
Maybe someday.
Maybe someday. You know, I think we'd have cute kids, but you know, but you know, and maybe that I'm just an optimistic dreamer. I mean, I think the real revolutionary thing to happen, you know, in science would be if same-sex couples could truly reproduce together. I think that would be
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And I hope that that happens in the next, the next few hundred years or something. But
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
the
Yeah.
reality is that's not how the world works right now. And 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 I think that, this I think that there's a distinction between just pointing out the realities of how babies are made, and
Yeah.
then doing, going beyond that and advocating for, you necessarily have to parent with the opposite sex, and you know all that. I don't think that those two things are synonymous.
Yeah, because the revolutionary thought here is that we can change what parenting means. The definitions, it doesn't have to fall into the traditional model, and it doesn't have to be defined a specific way, like everybody lives in the same house. And you can define it in many different ways, many different ways. So, and then, there's some legal things that you have to consider for sure. We're not ignoring that. And I think that's important to
Yeah.
talk to somebody, an attorney that can help you feel legally protected and legally, have a
Yeah.
good legal agreement. But like you and your friend, if you have a good relationship, a friendship, that's certainly something you can agree upon and work out with each other. Can it get complicated in the future? It can, but I think that people have to know that relationships are always going to be complicated with humans. And so if you can navigate that relationship, know that you're going to be connected, but know that there's going to be times where you're going to, ebb and flow, be closer or not be close, and that you can work through any conflict together and have good conflict resolution. Those are the types of things that you can talk
Mm-hmm.
about when you're entering into any kind of a relationship, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call that. I've actually had somebody recently comment about my book and saying that you should just, a lesbian couple, that I should leave the science out of it. Yeah. What do you say to
No.
that?
How? We're talking about a biological process. Making a baby is a biological process.
What about this person told me, wrote to me and said, help me understand when people say the LGBTQ community pretends genetics aren't real. I guess that's kind of what we're speaking to, is like when it's the whole idea of leave the science out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And how is that not a this person thinks it was a judgment of their purchasing egg and sperm of you.
yeah. So maybe the distinction we should make here is um, individuals feeling judged by, recipient parents feeling judged as individuals, when donor conceived people are really largely taking judgment with this entire system that people are interacting with.
Yeah.
And I understand that it's hard not to take that personally when you're contributing to it by purchasing gametes.
Yeah.
The thing about pretending genetics aren't real, I mean, I'll just speak for myself here. I think that this largely comes down to this idea of, it's just a cell, it's just the ingredients that I need. And this sort of distinction between what this, vial of sperm means to you and what it's eventually going to mean to this person who's going to come to exist. And I think that there's that, and because the meanings are going to be different. And I think that for the people in the gay community who say it really doesn't matter. None of this matters. It doesn't matter that it doesn't matter that you have this information. And I'm not saying that that's everyone. I know it's not. I think that's where this idea of, you're pretending that genetics really aren't real, and you're pretending that your kids somehow play by different rules than literally every other human being that exists. or right. Kids that are products of heterosexual relationships, when it's socially, yes, they are going to have a different experience because they have gay parents, and that's one thing. But I know a lot of donor conceived people who get very offended at the assertion that, well, some people just don't have moms, or some people just don't have dads, because they're seeing things not through a social lens, but through a genetic one. And to assert that, well, you just don't have a dad, it's like, we all genetically have a father,
Yeah.
and maybe it's that, maybe it's just this social kind of genetic distinction, and one group of people are seeing things through that lens, through that social lens, and the other group of people aren't, but they're not for very, very good reason.
Yeah. Do you think people take it for granted that if they knew the source of their genetics, the people that contributed to them and that created them biologically,
Mm-hmm.
the people that knew that can't see through the lens of those who don't know that and get confused with this idea of role role versus parent
Mm-hmm.
biology?
I do think
Mm.
that. And it's interesting. There was a conference in New York a couple of years ago about the bioethics of donor conception that I went
Mm.
to. And one of the attendees brought up this concept of like genetic privilege. And that if privilege is fundamentally, when we talk about white
Mhm.
privilege or, things like that, that fundamentally the idea of privilege is that there are um, things in the world that you get to not see and not pay attention to by virtue of your
Mhm.
position
Yeah.
in the world. And if you're, white, for
Yeah.
example, there is just you don't see racism
Mhm.
the same
That's right.
way that
Yeah.
that a black person does, and there are
Mhm.
just certain things that you don't really have to worry about.
Mhm.
And I think that one could make the argument that genetic or biological privilege is similar. If you grow up
Yeah.
knowing both of your genetic parents, there are just things that are so like not even in your
Right.
purview, and it's not your
Yeah.
fault. That's your experience, but it is so different.
Like genetic mirroring.
Absolutely,
Genetic
yeah.
mirroring is when we can look at family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone, grandparents, and see parts of ourselves reflected in them and vice versa. They can see it in us. If you have genetic mirroring, you take it for granted. If you don't have it, it's different. It's your experience is different. Your challenges are different. There's a study that came out that particularly with body image, adoptees struggled because they couldn't see other members of their family that had the same body structure, and they had issues with self-acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's height or body shape, really affected someone's self-esteem. And to understand the challenges that you as a donor conceived person, as an adoptee, as someone who doesn't know their biology for various reasons, um, to be able to see through that lens is important. The parent narrative, the parent centric narrative of, I want a child, this is how I want to do it, and this is the way we're going to see it, and my child will see it this way too.
Mm-hmm. And I totally understand that a lot of the consequences are not anticipated because this whole process is so, if you're a recipient parent, can be so isolating and so lonely. Like my parents were, going through this process in the 90s, and my mom, she'll say things like, well, I didn't think that you would have, a few dozen siblings because I thought that I was the only one who was doing this. Like,
Mm.
I didn't know
Wow.
anyone. I never heard, she heard of one case
Yeah.
in the news in the early 90s of someone, I think in BC, who had contracted like HIV from donor gametes, and she was like, that's the only time I've ever heard of anyone doing this, and I was so scared that something's going to happen, and I was going to get sick, or you were going to get sick, or something. But I didn't anticipate any of these consequences, literally because I thought that, oh my god, I must be the only woman in the world who's doing this.
Yeah.
Um,
Isolating people
mhm.
from each other, keeping a secret.
Yeah,
Mm.
but I do see the tension now in the present day, particularly, and keep in mind my parents are a heterosexual couple, but I think present day with same-sex families, I do think there is a real social and to some degree legal and political tension, because how do you reconcile this idea that you've been fighting for these rights and this recognition and this kind of legitimacy. And when you get it, oh my God, like now there's another problem and your rights are
Right.
conflicting with other people's rights. I mean, I totally understand the tension.
It's got to be frustrating. Yes. And I know, and I've heard
Yeah.
that say as well. That's like, it's already hard enough. And now we have to deal with this. And that is frustrating. I can't, yeah. And yet we can't ignore your needs as a donor conceived
Yeah.
person because of that either. Working through those challenges and those complexities, I find that there's so much growth from that experience.
There are certainly recipient parents who are acknowledging that, yeah, maybe this is the most ethical thing. And how can we figure out how to do it better? How can we figure out how to create change?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you brought up that study about adoptees and body image, because I was just talking with someone the other day and I was wondering what incidences of body dysphoria and dysmorphia are for adoptees and donor conceived people. I think that there's been in the last, I don't know, decade or so, this kind of turn, particularly with transnational adoptees, that things like culture are really important. It's really important that people can see their cultural heritage mirrored to them and their language mirrored to them and things like that. And I have wondered recently, why we can acknowledge that that's important and we can begin to acknowledge that that's important, but we can't acknowledge that genetic mirroring is important too.
Yeah. When we adopted our daughter from China, it was really, really emphasized to us that we needed to celebrate and embrace her culture. And we've incorporated Chinese culture into our family life. And that was just so, so important. And yet like you said, like genes don't matter and DNA doesn't matter. And maybe as people don't understand the science, I think some people thought that if you put a cell inside someone else's body, that it somehow would change and that the DNA would change. And so maybe there's a misconception there and they don't realize that no, it's actually the DNA structure doesn't change. That
Yeah. I mean, I think so, and I don't want to get into this too much because I know that people have a lot of feelings about this, but I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of what epigenetics are, because that's part of it, which I don't. It gets spicy, so let's leave that off the table. But I do think that it might go back to this idea of genetic privilege and what it means to recognize yourself in your family and your place in the world, your place in your family, your family's place in the world, and things like that. Like when I first found out that I was donor conceived, it was because I did an ancestry DNA test and my little sister found me. And as we got chatting and the truth was revealed, she sent me a photo, and my girlfriend at the time looked at the photo, looked at me, and went, "Holy shit! Oh my God, are you seeing this?" And you know what? No, I didn't recognize myself in this person at all. And it felt like I personally was so like outside myself. Like there were just aspects of my physical being that I was so kind of like alienated from because I hadn't seen them mirrored back. And I had no idea what to make of it when it was. I didn't recognize this person, and it was weird because on the one hand, I felt super connected to her and kind of this idea of, I've seen you somewhere before, I kind of feel like I've interacted with you before, but also recognizing that these things that make me, these physical attributes that make me feel that way are very foreign to me.
That's such a great way to say it. That is such a great way to say
it. And after seeing various or being through this, 11 times now, I feel the same way every time. This sort of, I'm looking and I'm searching for this familiarity and I can see it. And as soon as I see it, it makes me so uncomfortable because it's so foreign.
It's like feeling alienated from yourself in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so important. And self-fragmentation that can happen. And when you don't have those built-in genetic mirroring throughout the years, one way that I suggest people help make up for that is, because that's the next question that comes, well, what do we do, as parents, is to be their mirror by seeing them for who they are and reflecting that back to them from a very young age. So beginning to do it. So I had to do a lot of identity work later in life because of the lack of genetic mirroring. So given that, start helping them out with that identity stuff early on. And we always say it happens in adolescence, but it's happening from day one, genetic identity. And so, mirroring it back by noticing things that are unique to them, traits and abilities and skills and just little ways they are,
Yeah. And I think with this little sister that found me, I mean, we look a lot alike. And it's interesting. It's been like this weird kind of like healing process, even just looking at her face. I'm like, wow. I mean, these cheekbones and this forehead look good on you.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe this ain't so bad.
Yeah. Self-acceptance and self-love and just all that stuff that happens in the mirror. Yeah, totally. That makes sense. It really does. So did you just have found one sibling?
Oh no, I've been through this like 10, 11 times now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's exhausting emotionally, or how would you describe that?
Oh, yeah. After the last one, which was at some point last year, again, through like a commercial DNA test, because, I'm on all the databases. But, after that, I was talking to that same little sister, and I was like, yeah, I think I gotta not do this. Like, I think I have to set some sort of boundary. But, it's like, on the one hand, it's fair. It's for my own emotional self-preservation. But on the other hand, I feel like, if someone were to pop up tomorrow on 23andMe or something, I would feel this sense of obligation. And what do I owe you as my sibling? So
I've heard that.
I don't know. Yeah, but it is exhausting to just go through this over and over and over. And I know that, there aren't just 11 of us.
No.
Yeah. So.
No. And so it will continue. It will continue. And that's hard. And that people, to put yourself in someone's shoes, if you're discovering a sibling month after month and you don't know when it's going to end and you don't know how it's going to impact your future family. We talk about the ethics of the system. That's why it's unethical, is that there is no one keeping track and there aren't people that really even care that are selling the sperm and egg about the consequences on the families long term.
Exactly.
Or they don't know.
Like I was looking at the, paperwork that had all the donors, putting that in quotes, donors information on it, my biological father's information on it. And even the paperwork itself, I mean, it was given to me by my sister because my parents threw it out when I was a child, because they were never going to tell me. But I've been in contact with my biological father for the last couple of years, and the discrepancies in the paperwork, it's I don't know how to reconcile that. And even this idea that my biological father, I'm in Canada, and all my siblings that I know of are in the US. My biological father's in the US. I don't know if I have any other siblings here where I am in Canada. And, and one of the consequences of oversights in the industry is, number one, looking at this paperwork, knowing that there are discrepancies and wondering, okay, when I have kids and, what if I don't have contact with my biological father or something, like, what am I going to tell them if they have questions or some sort of medical problem or something? But the other hand is, am I walking by people in my city and like they're my siblings? I mean, largely, when I was single and when I was dating, my strategy was just avoid all Polish people because like they could be related to me.
That's a big
I
Yeah.
remember meeting this woman, and I think, it was like New Year's Eve or whatever. And she was like, I need to, like, kiss someone at midnight. And,
Mhm.
we had like a little smooch, and I found out that she was Polish, and I almost threw
Oh
up. I
no.
mean, it was bad. But I'm like, well, I don't know.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah,
like,
you don't know.
and
And
like,
this,
how else do you deal with
yeah,
it?
and the emotional burden that places on you to have to consider that all the time. People in the field say, it's so rare. And I've had pushback. It's so rare for that to happen. But even if it is rare, how do we really know that? Because we don't have the data.
Mhm. Exactly.
And but the emotional burden is there every day, almost every day for some. Once you're, especially
Oh,
when you're at
absolutely.
the age of where you're in romantic and you're wanting to have romantic relationships, which,
Yeah.
so I do want to say too, this proves that your account is satirical, because I think you posted something funny about about picking traits of based on physical appearance only, and then said something about jokes on you, I'm hideous. But that's definitely satire, because you are not hideous, you are beautiful.
Thank
So
you.
yeah. So I mean, and that I'm sure that I had to crack up at that one, because of course I knew what you look like, but also because um again, it hits you right in the gut, which is to make you think about what's happening. And it's so common for parents to pick based on physical traits. And again, we're not saying you're doing a bad thing or you're a bad person for that. It's just that that is such a surface thing. It's one aspect, but that there's so much more to it. That's all that they're telling parents, though, when they go to choose a donor. They're just telling them, pick somebody who looks like you are. We have this new scientific technology that can match your face with the person's face.
Yeah.
Again, that is the wrong message. That's not what we need, how we need to be educating parents. And that's all they know until they come to a counselor or someone who speaks differently. And then they realize, okay, well, that makes more sense. Is it's not just about us looking alike,
Mhm.
but that we have other traits that are similar too, and that we embrace those things that are different.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think, talking about physical characteristics and physical attractiveness is, I mean, on the one hand, it's funny because it is one of those things that is sort of absurd to think that there are sort of hand-picked traits that you can literally look in a catalog and find.
yeah.
I know that the counter argument that some people will make is, well, straight people do this. People who are heterosexual and don't have problems with infertility do this all the time. I mean, do you go out of your way to like pick a partner you think is physically hideous? Probably not. Um, but I think that that pointing things like this out with respect to donor conception opens up a bigger conversation about the expectations that some people have of their kids, and some expectations that the donor conceived people have about themselves because of how they were, quote, supposed to be when they were created.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't have anything to do, fundamentally with physical attractiveness. Like, I know a lot of DCPs who will say, I feel bad because I was supposed to be athletic, I was supposed to be tall, I was supposed to be good at math,
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to have all these talents, and I'm a huge disappointment because I don't.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you deal with that? And the other thing I should say is, part of why I started the account was because I was, and to some degree still am, having trouble finding a therapist who would talk to me about this. It's like I would be emailing back and forth trying to find someone, and as soon as I mentioned this, and this happened a few times, as soon as I mentioned being donor conceived in an email exchange, it would just be radio silence. I just wouldn't get a response. Um, and the people who did want to talk to me, and I made sure to seek out people who were familiar with things like adoption, because
Yeah.
it's as close as I'm going to get in my
Right.
city.
Yeah.
And they would just sort of be upfront and say, like, no, I help parents, I don't I don't do this. So part of why I started the account was I personally needed someone to talk to who was maybe going to talk back to me. Even if I fundamentally was just screaming into the void, I was really hoping that someone would talk back.
Yeah. So therapists there's not enough that know this perspective.
No.
Mm.
No.
Yeah. Or you get the same message from them if you do go, maybe, which is, oh, but you should just be grateful. You had, you have good parents and they really wanted you, right? So you get that same messaging that just is more harmful, because it's basically saying what you feel is wrong and not accepted. And therefore you should somehow make the feelings go away, which people can't. And then they feel not understood, not accepted by the people in their surroundings, and still struggling inside with this cognitive dissonance, with this emotional pain. Have that go on and on and on and on, continue the isolation, continue the lack of self-acceptance, continue the self-alienation. All of that leads to psychological crisis that can lead to people feeling like they have no other option because they feel so misunderstood in this world.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we can get some more dialogue around this and more questions. If you have questions about something that we said, I would just encourage you to have a dialogue with us and ask us, and let's, even maybe get together, or if we need to talk it out, because that brings more understanding about this issue rather than jumping to conclusions. Or, if you have an initial reaction, strong reaction to this, anything we said on this podcast, I hope that you can take it as an opportunity to just dig deeper into your feelings, and maybe even challenge yourself in a way, and challenge us if you want to, but that to see it as a tool for help, for growth, rather than a message of trying to alienate you or make you feel bad. If shame's coming up, maybe it's internalized shame that we can help work through, or that we can help you to understand what's coming up. So, ultimately it's your children that are going to benefit from that. So
yeah, absolutely. And if people want to reach out to at satirical donor conception on Instagram, I realize that some of the posts that I make are a little bit spicy, but I promise I'm actually kind and gentle in my DMs.
It's been just such a pleasure interacting with you. And I believe you have a lot to offer. Your voice is so important. And while it's hard to hear and it's controversial and it's a complex topic, that makes it even more important for you to be heard. And so I hope that you'll keep speaking out and keep talking. And I just feel like we're going to see or hear more of you.
I hope
for
so.
sure. So
thank you for having me.
Maybe a book.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a book in the future. So are you a writer at all? You are?
Yeah. I got to finish a whole dissertation first, but I'll get there.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for listening. If you would like to follow me for more content, you can find me on Instagram at Jana Rupnow, LPC, and Facebook. And you can also grab a copy of my book, 3 Makes Baby, on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and Target.com. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and rate it and share it with a friend if you like it. Have a great day.